the theme is fluidity and flow. And I started thinking about fluidity and flow, and of course, immediately went to the ocean, and which I miss very much being in Colorado. And we're looking at what's the difference between a healthy ego and an unhealthy. And again, there's no such thing as getting rid of your ego. If we didn't have an ego, how could we talk to anyone? How could we function in the world? It would be, each time I'd show up, I'd be a different person. That just wouldn't work. So a healthy ego is fluid and it's flexible and it's functional. An unhealthy ego is fixated, rigid, defensive. So we're going to look at this in a lens of compassion and humor because let's face it, we all have an ego. My saying is the ego's like an asshole. We all have one. And so we just learn how to work with it in such a way that it serves us instead of sabotaging us or working against us. So the flow for today is first, we're going to look at what octopi and kids have to teach us about flow. And then we're going to do a wave meditation. And then we're going to go into ego shenanigans. And then we're going to end with an open awareness meditation. So octopi, I don't know how many of you saw that movie, My Octopus Teacher. Did anybody see that? Oh, it's just so heart opening. And essentially what I love about octopi and how they're so interesting to me is that they have kind of 8 tentacles going off in different directions all at once. And those tentacles explore and then bring information back to the head. But they're all going in their own way. They're not coordinated. And the head is kind of the manager. The head takes in all the information and says, okay, we're going to go here. So in general, the octopi have both an explorer and what they call an exploiter. And an exploiter takes in information, gathers the resources, makes a plan, and carries out the plan. Then you look at kids. Kids are all about exploration and play. I don't know how many of you have grandkids or nephews, but when you go on a little walk with a kid, a 5-year-old, let's say, they're all over the place. Oh, look, here's a snail. Look at this leaf. There's nothing goal directed about it, right? They're always exploring, and kids are so open and they're learning and changing all the time. So then we go to adults, and adults, we have both. We can explore and learn and change, but we also our ego is the exploiter, finds the resources, makes a plan, and makes things happen. And imagine if we didn't have that. It'd be kind of a mess. So what we want to do is get both things happening. So what they call it in neuroscience is the lantern consciousness and the spotlight consciousness. So the lantern opens abroad and you get to see things in the big picture, the wide view. And the spotlight looks in and, finds the details, makes the plan, and carries it out. So wonderful, right? But what happens is we unconsciously start to contract and get more ego-oriented and control-oriented. So our manager, instead of having lots of exploration, starts, I need to control, I need to get things going, and they forget about the exploration and play. So how do we adults play? One of the ways that was kind of enheartening to me was reading about this neuroscience of it was like Marvel movies, Spider-Man and all those. I've always thought why do people like this? David likes it, Lee likes it, especially guys like these Marvel movies. And I just kind of don't get it. But I have watched a few, and what I realize is it's just about play. When we can watch a movie and just get lost in it and lose our ego self, that's a form of play. So we don't have to feel guilty about watching Netflix every night or whatever night. And another way that we play is, just with friends, laughing, creativity, just enjoying life and not being so goal directed. And all of this requires a certain amount of openness. And to me, that's what meditation is about more than anything. It's about dropping the shoulds, the have tos, the who am I's, I'm this, I'm that, I can't do this, and just be open. Just be completely open to what is without any expectations, any agenda, any judgments. And what a relief. So today we're going to start with how we open up our body. And as many of you know, I have a somatic approach to meditation. And the reason is if your body's constricted and tight, your mind is going to be constricted. If your mind is constricted, your body's going to be tight. And it's much easier to go into the body and just hum a little bit to open it up or give it a little bit of space. And then that opens the mind back up into big mind, into wide mind. Whereas if we try to always intervene with the mind, we can be on a wild goose chase. The mind goes here and there and here and there. It's like chasing rabbits. Here's a rabbit, here's another, and it's all over the place. Where the body, it's simpler. It's just a simpler way to intervene. And the body can't help but be genuine. Can't say that for the mind. The mind can talk us into anything, out of anything, rationalize anything. And that's where the ego lives, is in the mind. And if we remember, the mind has a negativity bias. It is always looking for, when's the shit going to hit the fan? What's the problem? Was I just slighted? It's kind of vigilant. And it exists, and the ego is inherently unstable because the mind is negativity biased. It's fearful by nature. It's trying to help us survive. Well, that's a good thing. We want to survive. But if we live in the mental realm all the time, there's a certain vigilance and tension and constriction, both in the mind and the body. Make sense? Yeah. So we're going to start with the body. And so I want everyone to get comfortable and make sure that your back is supported. And if you're uncomfortable, feel free to lay down. Just a comfortable body is important, just as long as you're supported and your cell phone's off. And if you could mute yourself during this part, that'd be great, in case your dog barks like mine did last week or whatever. So bringing your attention inward, and you can bring your eyes to a soft focus where your lids are halfway open. It's like a cover, just covering your eyes, or completely close them, or whatever's comfortable. You can even keep them open. And let yourself draw inward and just notice your inner beingness right now. Notice your energy. Notice the quality of the energy. Not trying to change anything, just being aware. Invite your body to surrender to gravity. Just feel it grow heavy. Feel the support of the earth beneath you, unconditionally holding you. Invite your muscles to let go as you feel a wave of relaxation wash down your head, your neck, your face, your shoulders, your chest, your belly, your pelvis, your legs. And imagine that you have plugs in the soles of your feet, and you can pull those plugs and let any tension just stream out your entire body, just emptying out. And notice your breath and feel yourself breathing in and breathing out. Then you can breathe in through your nose and out through your nose or your mouth, whatever feels better. And let your body move as we breathe. The body moves, and if it doesn't move, it creates tension. So feel your head almost like a bobber, one of those little fishing bobbers that just bobs a little bit. Your spine moves just imperceptibly, even. And feel your breath rising and falling. And your belly fills up with air and empties out. And your belly fills up and fills up your whole body with fresh, revitalizing energy and empties as it falls and empties out everything, any tightness, any tension. And imagine your breath as a wave, rising and falling, rising and falling. Breathing in relaxation and breathing out anything you want to let go of, emptying out. And notice the sound of the breath, like waves of the ocean. Rising and falling. And let your body find its own rhythm as you just get out of its way and let it breathe you. Rising and falling. And feel yourself drop a little bit deeper into the core of your body, into your bones, into your organs. Into that central channel, the core of your energy body. Letting the wave of breath rise and fall. And feel that wave come all the way up to your head. And feel that fleshy covering of the skull and the scalp just hang on the skull. Feel the temples soften, cranium soften, your jaw release, your neck just a light, slight bobble as that wave moves your whole body. Feel your neck unwind. And moving down to the chest. Feeling your chest melt layer by layer. Like ice melting in water, layer by layer. Imagine that your organs are transparent and you could breathe right through them. Giving a little TLC to any part of your body that could use it. Just breathing love and kindness into it. Feel your arms melt, your hands. Your belly soften. Even your bones melt. And just let the earth support you. You feel your pelvis melt. Feel your pelvis as if it were a bowl, and you can feel the water just slightly moving like a boat rocking with the wave. Your lower back releases. Now be aware of your entire spine, from the tailbone to the cranium. And just feel it expand with the inhale and melt with the exhale. Feel that life force shimmering and vibrating in that central channel that runs through the center of your body vertically. And just scan your spine for a moment and see if there are any kind of dead spots, any areas that feel a little numb or not awake. And bring your awareness to that area and breathe spaciousness into it, empty, open space. Creating space, creating ease. Or you can hum into it. That vibration wakes it up, brings it to life, and nobody will hear you. We're muted. So feel free to hum. Any area now, not just the spine, but any organ, even a part of your brain. Just tend to it, giving it space, giving it vibration, inviting it to the party. And now feel your whole body breathing effortlessly. It knows what to do. You can just let go. And now very gradually, you're going to start to wiggle your fingers and your toes. Maybe stretch a little bit. Gradually open your eyes. And you can unmute yourself. So just take a moment to notice the difference of when we come into our body, how you feel, and how your mind feels different. Just kind of tune in. Does your mind feel any different? Anybody notice any difference with their minds?
Lighter.
Lighter? Nice. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because we didn't even pay any attention to the mind. We didn't say, go to your mind, don't follow your thoughts, follow. We didn't do anything with the mind. And that's this idea of if we just get to be so we love being in our body, we find even one little comfy area and just hang out there, it becomes a habit. And the mind naturally calms and becomes more peaceful when the body calms. And that was 10 minutes. So it's a quick fix,
That
even
was,
a few breaths. What were you going to say?
yeah, that was a great meditation. I'm used to being more stoic and rigid
Yep.
in my meditation, but especially when you said, it was like you gave my body permission when you said something like, let your body move with the breath or something like that. I don't know, there's something changed in me. I actually almost started swaying a little bit, and yeah, everything relaxed. So that one line sort of gave my body permission to be in the meditation differently.
Yes, it's so interesting how meditation, people get real rigid. And it's like if you think of the breath as a wave, if it hits a wall of rigidity, it splashes and it almost creates a little violence in there, you know? And so if you let your body move with it, you become that wave, you become part of the breath, and that naturally calms the mind. And, every freaking meditation retreat I went to until I was in my 40s, it was rigidity. And it would take me 2 weeks to recover my back. And so I quit going to them until I found a guy that was like, you can lie down if you want to. It's like, okay, you're my guy. Um, so yes, bring our body into it. Life is hard enough, and being kind to the body and letting it move how it wants to move, such a freaking relief. Yeah.
You
And
said something else, Jane, that was like an opposing thought that allowed me to totally let go. And then I thought, oh my God, what did she just say that got me just so deep? And I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember. I thought, I'm going to try to remember this. And then I was just so deep that I couldn't recall. Next time I'm
Yay.
recording you.
Yay, yay. So, speaking of how we all are, the ego, or at least an unhealthy ego, is kind of the opposite of this. It's about contraction. I've come to this realization that the ego and the self is really kind of just a contractual habit. It's kind of like we kind of contract about something, trying to control something in this freaking crazy life, right? And so, bringing the body into it can allow that ego to realize, everything's changing. Let it go. Um, so, what we're going to look at today is, and I want people to look at it from a place of humor and a place of just like, everybody's got an ego. We all do. And the ego is basically patterns of constriction, contraction, and thoughts and beliefs based on our conditioning. It's not who we are. You know, it's just who we have been conditioned to be. It's the have to, shoulds, trying to play a role. And, about 3 months ago, I went to a class reunion, and I heard someone say, "Oh, I remember when I first met you, Jane." And I thought, "Oh no," because I was a little asshole as a kid. I just really was. And I never hear anything good when people say something to me about when I was a kid. So I go, "Oh, okay, I'll hear it." And she says, "Yeah, we were at Girl Scout camp, and we were all in tents. And it was about 11 o'clock at night, and the camp leaders were yelling at us to be quiet. 5 girls in a tent. Do you think we're going to be quiet, right? You know?" And so they're yelling, "Be quiet, be quiet." And I guess I yelled out, "What are you going to do? Make us go home?" And little asshole, right? So she hauled me out of the tent and threatened to take me home. And I groveled until she let me stay. But I had developed this rebellious authority thing. So any authority I rebelled against, and I didn't trust authority because they'd lied to me. And so I just became a little asshole. And that kind of became my conditioning and part of my ego. And I had to learn how to be not snarky, not rebellious, follow rules like traffic lights and things like that as I developed. But that's how the ego develops, for me, it developed from Catholicism. They told me everything I did and thought and, felt was a sin. And I'm like, I don't trust authority anymore. So I rebelled, and that became the little asshole. And, it took many, many years of conditioning and becoming a nice person again, sometimes, to get over that. So when you look at how your ego formed, just look at your conditioning, your parents, your gender, your religion, where you lived, all that stuff is our conditioning. And so what we look at is the ego is more the conditioning, and the openness of meditation brings us into the unconditioned mind, unconditioned love. And yet think of awareness itself. And awareness is like this background that accommodates everything and anything that comes up. Thoughts that are terrible, thoughts that are great, thoughts that are neutral, feelings. It doesn't say no to anything. And when we identify with awareness, we're that open. We don't judge. We just kind of observe and watch and feel, and that gets rid of a lot of those. What do I want to say? Constrictions, defenses. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the shenanigans of the ego, and I want you to just kind of see what resonates with you. Of what are some of the things your ego does. And a lot of times, see, these are patterns that are unconscious. One of the biggest ego patterns that we hear about is denial. And one of the things that we deny the most is death. So I think of meditation, and Sue's mentioned this, that a lot of us come here because we're dealing with upcoming death. And death of an ego is about letting go of all that. It doesn't really die. Nothing really dies, right? But it lets go. And so meditation is really practice for that we know how to let go. We know how to let go with grace and ease, and we can trust whatever arises. So that's kind of heavy, but I know I recently experienced a death of someone, and it slapped me in the face. And then I thought, I knew this person was going to die. Why was it such a shock? And it's like we can't really hold the consciousness, the awareness of death too easily. And yet it's something that's going to happen to every single one of us. So to me, that's one of the biggest denials that we all have. And really, when I think of this life is short, it wakes me up, and it makes me more present and kind of more savoring each morsel of this life and what's really important. And that when we let go of all of that, there's this opening to just joy. So the opposite of that is our ego. That's like, the ego is inherently insecure. It has an inferiority complex. And so what happens is if we feel inferior, Nancy likes this because we talked about this psychologist that talked about that we're all in an inferiority complex, and we try to compensate with superiority. And so, I'm not good enough. I'm better than. I compare myself to this person and that person. Really? When we're all have different backgrounds, genetics, minds, how do we really compare ourselves? And yet we all do, right? That's social media in a nutshell, or why it harms a lot of people, especially young people. So that comparative mind, that's an ego game that keeps us in that, am I good enough? Am I better than? And so kind of seeing that. Another one is projection. When we project our feelings and thoughts onto another person. Like I have this friend that said, well, we should all do this. And I'll say, no, I think maybe you want to do that. It's also the rebel in me. Don't tell me what to do, right? So that's another one we do. We blame. That's the ego. The ego is so fragile, that sense. It doesn't want to feel bad about itself. So it has to put it out here, right? Dissociation. When we just, it's like a balloon. You just go out of yourself because something kind of is uncomfortable. That used to be a big one of mine. And thank God I learned how to be in my body, because I was a mess. I was just out here kind of watching things and realizing, holy moly, I'm at risk here. I'm not even present. The big one is control, or as Sin likes to say, the illusion of control. Because the fact is, we respond to things. That's kind of the best we can do, is just respond, not react. That's ego. Ego likes to react because it's, always trying to prove something. Whereas respond is kind of coming from a place of, calm. You just do what you can do. Recognize, it's good enough. Not perfect, good enough. And another one is getting kind of focused on problems, seeing things as a problem. And there's a quote I love, which is, life isn't a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And I love that because it's easy to get into kind of our panties in a wad about something, right? About, if I get, usually for me, if I get upset with a person or something and it just gnaws at me until I can just let it go. And all of these, I like to think of as the ego is just little me, the little me that doesn't have the big mind view. The big mind is when we have that wide angle lens and we can just kind of step out and see our humanness and go, oh, that was hard. I thought I should do better than that, but I didn't, or whatever it is, just kindness and compassion, right? And our unconditioned mind is accepting of everything. And it is just kindness and compassion. So watching kind of what our ego defenses are and just kind of keeping a little watch on them very kindly. And I have this quote about the ego that I really like. And she says, "What is the self that the ego habit holds? Observe the ego for a long time before trying to negate it." In the Tibetan tradition, they speak of developing a fragment of consciousness, a spy consciousness, that observes the ego self from the corner, as it were. The best time to see this I is said to be in a state of injured innocence, when you're indignant, when you feel that you shouldn't have been wronged. The thought, I'm right, this has been done to me, contains that firm feeling, the hard nut of the self. I love that phrase, the hard nut. The key, again, is not dissolving, but developing the ego into a more flexible and permeable ego. This is considered a strong ego, capable of both surrender and function. The weak ego is the rigid, defensive one. So I love that, we're not pretending that we're going to kill the ego off or that we don't need an ego. Of course we do. So any thoughts about anybody's defense mechanisms that they think about, or what it feels like when your ego, and why don't we do this just for a moment, close your eyes and choose one little moment when you feel you've been wronged or you feel your ego's kind of riled up, and just notice how it affects your mind and how it affects your body. And just watching it from that little spy self with no judgment, maybe a little humor. And then when you're ready, you could bring yourself back. And anything anybody noticed in their body or their mind when their ego's doing its thing.
My mind got very busy right away. It's a million justifications for me.
Yeah, the ego's always justifying, isn't it?
Mhm, mhm.
Exactly.
And my body was much more rigid. I mean, I was in that very relaxed place post the meditation, and it was just, that quick. It was very rigid.
Yeah, it's amazing how quick it happens, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah. Anybody else notice anything? Thanks, Mark.
It was last night. I was with a whole group of people, and I was hangry, and I was right, and God darn it, I was like, and I go, oh my gosh, did you see yourself? And it's like, oh man, oh well.
And what helped you shift your attitude toward it?
Actually, I was with my grandson,
Mm-hmm.
and he was in a good mood. he was really hungry, but he was playing and he whispered a few things to me and I go, oh, I don't have to be this way. I don't have to be right. I don't if everybody's bossing me around, oh well. That's their problem. Because I'm also a rebel and I ain't gonna do that. So yeah, it's a busy little thing, the ego.
It really is, isn't it? It's like it scampers to try to get things right, you know?
Frantically, little squirrel collecting stuff. It's mine. This is mine. I'm right.
Me, me, me.
Me.
Yeah.
But if I didn't have some sort of rebelliousness, I'd just be mush. So I
Yeah.
can see where there's some importance to having an ego that collects yourself, that says, hey, look,
Yeah.
maybe you are right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and we have a self, right?
Mhm.
So we have great things about ourselves too. I mean, the rebel is thinks for themselves, right?
Mm.
Doesn't follow all the shoulds. So all sorts of things like that. Anybody else notice anything about their ego?
I noticed that I had an interaction with a friend and at dinner, and I felt so tight and so defensive and so bad. And I felt almost like my blood wasn't circulating because I was so much on, like
Mm.
defending myself.
Yep.
And I felt so unacknowledged. And so I felt then defensive.
Yep.
And it felt so bad. I just felt like the whole the whole thing just felt so bad, and it wasn't the kind of a person that would understand processing it. There's just some people that you can't process things with in my life, and
Yep.
it just felt bad. And I thought, something, I don't think that I need to be around this person.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't bring out the best in me, and there's no way to really heal it. But I felt like it was all my ego just feeling so assaulted. I felt assaulted, and I
Yeah.
felt like my ego was protecting myself.
Yeah. And that's the part of the ego. The ego is just trying to protect us. It isn't inherently evil or anything. It's trying to keep us alive and protect us. But sometimes it takes over. And I think of the ego as you put that ego hat on when you need it, and then you take it off.
Yeah.
And the thinking mind, turn it on when you need it, take it off. And that's about just trusting that beingness that isn't thinking, calculating, planning, just in open presence, and trusting that you have enough wisdom in that open presence that it will help you, it will guide you.
So I'd like to make a request for a future session. I would like to know how to take that hat off and put it on for us in a few weeks. I find that part very difficult. So
Uh-huh.
Well, Jane,
Uh-huh.
I know you probably said it, but what's the ego good for exactly? It's good for, it's the part of our, go ahead,
Okay, so it's the manager.
the
And
manager.
yeah, if you have all those tentacles, you have yourself as a wife, your role as a grandmother, as a person that's working, as someone that just wants to play, as a creative, all these things going on, right? And the ego can kind of go, okay, let's pull it in. We got to get some shit done here. Right? And so it serves that. It's kind of like the chairman of the board. And you don't want to be the chairman of the board all the time, but sometimes you need the chairman of the board,
Mm.
right?
It's funny because we're growing up, like, as a younger person, your ego was kind of depicted as the part of you that thinks you're so great, like, oh, you think you're so great, you have such a big ego. But the real truth is that the ego is small. I mean, the bad side of it is, I can get this like pitiful thing, like a little, not that I pity party, but yeah, just being hurt, or I don't
Yeah.
know. It's kind of all of the feeling of not being able to be in control.
Yeah.
Is where it kind of, and it's fear and it's sadness. And there's so many things. It's just so hard to be a human sometimes,
It's really hard to be a human. I mean, we have an ego. And, that's why I like the fact that we realize we do have an ego and it has a function. Without an ego, how would you get anything done? How could I see you and know who you were? I'd be like, the woman with the short hair and, we need an eye. We need a chairman of the board. It gives us a platform to operate in the world from. And so that's the functional definition of ego. Now, in the spiritual world, it's about kill the ego, slay the ego. And it's just like, no, let's make a functional ego, an ego that's not rigid and that's permeable and flexible and, does what it needs to do. It can be kind of neutral. And then also have compassion for the ego that, like you said, gets hurt, feels less than, feels like you're not enough. And, comparative mind, because let's face it, the ego is a lot about our external experience too, who we are to others. And there's that part of us that gets ego validation from stuff. And that's kind of dangerous. Because what we really need is that internal locus of beingness instead of just all external. Oh, do they like me? Do they like me? It makes us really dependent, and that's kind of a weakened place to be. So the ego's tricky. It's slippery, it's tricky. And, we need to find ways of being kind to it and yet build an ego that works for us. Any other thoughts? Am I making sense?
Mhm. To me.
For me, am I muted now or have I interrupted?
I can hear
must
you.
be-
No, I can hear you.
Can
Cool.
you hear me?
Yep.
My ego is the comparative piece of the mind. And so it's just always on guard doing that comparative watching. I mean, it takes you out of your essence and into the external world and scanning for ways that you fail.
Yep.
So
Mm.
really,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the most control and comparison are the two of the most deadly games of the ego. Because comparison, you can always find someone better at something and worse at something. But do you want to be better than and less than, Yeah,
yeah.
I know. And so how do you just kind of turn that off when it crops up? Your ego voice
Me?
saying, yeah.
Well, what I've found kind of from observing the whole thing is it all has to, so I may be happy existing inside myself and having a conversation and having a great time. And then if I know or passing anything that reflects me, then I shut it all down because it's the visual kind of comparative thing that is kind of my nemesis.
Yeah. Anybody relate to this?
Oh, not at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, it's hard not to. I mean, that is, wasn't it Dalai Lama said that that's the worst part about Americans is that we don't think we're good enough.
Yeah.
We are always comparing and we never feel like we're good enough. And I think that's our national treasure is to not feel good enough, but
Yeah.
try to compensate for the feelings of not being good enough. Like, what, like, oh yeah, well, I'll find somebody else that's less than. So it makes me build myself up a little. And then I can, ignore the person that I think is better than me. And, it's just like,
Yeah.
yes.
Then you're still in the ego, just flip the other side of it, which is also not a great feeling.
No,
Ultimately.
it's not.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, where's this coming from? Oh, well,
Yeah.
it's it's the controlling and the comparison and doesn't feel good. So how can I form this ego so that it serves me?
Yes,
So that it, instead of me serving it.
exactly. Sin, you said something that light bulb went off in me, and you said, when we're in our essence. And so to me, the key is, how do we just flip back into that essence? How do we go from the ego that's contracted, comparing, judging, controlling, all that? And a couple ways. One is just going into your essence, go inside, go a breath. The breath is neutral. The breath doesn't have an ego. And so if you just take a couple exhales and let go, you will feel yourself go deeper inside into your essence. And also let go of any constriction. So just like Marty was saying, she could feel her body really constrict and the thoughts going. If you can relax your body with the breath, your mind will relax. And the ego exists in the mind. It's a mental concept and a mental structure. So if you just exhale, if you just go to your body, another humor is the best kind of reset button we have. If you can see the humor in what you're doing, sometimes I'll see myself kind of going off and I'll just be like, step back and look at myself. And I'm like a cartoon character. I mean, are you kidding? It's ridiculous. But, you laugh at the human condition too. You got to laugh, right? And it's the best emotional reset that we have is laughing, really is. More than crying, more than anything is laughing. So another one is the big mind, the wide view. And so if you're feeling tight, you're all caught up in this tiny little thing, just feel yourself like a zoom camera, kind of pull back and just see the whole scene. And even focus on some neutral aspects in the scene, some nature aspects or other people to take you out of that ego constriction within yourself. So big mind, breath, humor, like you were saying, Susie, about, your little grandson sent some, you can flip to that child part of yourself that just sees the humor in something. Those are all ways. I prefer the body because it's quicker and it's, just going into where's the constriction? Do I feel it in my face? The ego's a lot in the face. Do I feel it in my shoulders, chest, gut? It's usually the front of the body. That's kind of our persona, right? That's the mask we wear. It's usually in the front of the body. And so just bring in space, breathe, feel it, let go. And then the mind will settle as well. Any thoughts, feelings?
I think also what you said earlier, it's almost in a way for me to just be able to soften and of what you said of responding versus reacting. And I feel like the ego is so much reactivity. And I feel like if I allow myself to just soften and go into the essence and to the being of who I am and just responding from that place, it's such a distinction that allows me to, I think, to get back to myself.
Yeah, it's true. The softening, the melting, the letting go. And it just doesn't feel good to constrict
No.
around something, and I've gotten to this place where I think the ego is just a constriction. The self in a certain way is a constriction. We have to have one, but how can we be it and then learn to let go within it? That's really nice when we can do that. It's just let go within it. Yeah. So are we ready for another meditation? So this one is called Open Awareness Sky Mind. Nancy, you'll love this one. This is all about the mind as just open and like the sky. So if you get comfortable any way you need to, where your back is supported. All right. So let's start by bringing your attention inward. And just inviting your breath to breathe you however it wants to. Just giving it space to breathe you. And letting go of having to have any sort of tether, like go back to the breath. No, let's just be open. Just let yourself float in openness, feeling the earth beneath you supporting you, feeling your body supporting you. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, no self, just being. Just breathing. And feeling yourself drop down into that vast space within you. The universe that lives within you. Boundless, open space. Nothing to do. There's no right or wrong. Just breathing. And allow any thoughts or feelings to arise like clouds in the open sky. And just feel the openness of the sky accommodating anything that arises. No struggle. No pushing away. Just allowing. And feel your body melting into the open sky. Floating. Wide, open, boundless space. Just breathing. The breath rising and falling. Breathing in and letting go. And if a thought or feeling arises, feel the space within the clouds of mind. Feel the space within the thought, within the feeling. Very naturally, just feel yourself release into the open, boundless sky. Look closely until the clouds of mind begin to disappear, revealing open sky. No boundaries, completely open. And notice for a moment, who is observing the clouds of mind? Let that observer disappear. Allow any sense of self to fall away, to dissolve into space. Simply feel the vast, unbound space. Let yourself rest without any effort. Feel yourself held by this space that welcomes and holds you. Feel its unconditional holding. Feel the essence of being inside you, around you, everywhere. Rest in big love, essence itself. And now very gradually, you can begin to stretch. Wiggle your fingers or your toes. Move your body any way it wants to move. And as you're coming back, I'm going to read this quote from Albert Einstein, written in 1934. A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is kind of a prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from the prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. The true value of a human being is determined primarily by the measure and the sense in which he has attained liberation from the ego self. We shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if humanity is to survive. Go, Albert. Have you, any of you, I think, have heard that quote before? David, have you?
Yeah, actually put it in my kid's bar bat mitzvah book.
Do you think they got it?
Yeah, well, it was probably, there you go. It was my ego needing to put it in there and force it on my kids.
Projecting onto your kids.
There you go. That quote, yeah.
Yeah. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Any noticings, any comments?
That first meditation that you did, Jane,
Yes.
you never mentioned the mind. And I feel like that was the key to being able to kind of let go of it. You know, often you're hearing about attached. Nothing prompted me to go to my head. That was really helpful.
Oh, that's interesting. That's great feedback. I love that. Yeah.
I have to try to remember that myself when, when I start thinking.
Yeah. And to me, the whole kind of somatic meditation is about learning to be in the body, in awareness, so that we're not thinking, so that we have an alternative. Otherwise, the mind just goes. Yeah.
Thank you. Those were great.
What'd you say?
Those were great. Two different like bookends for me of meditations. It was really wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So the one is about finding the space in a thought, and the other is about just going into the body.
I love the wave and water metaphors. That was just so lovely for me to get looser in the body.
Yeah. Yeah.
More space.
Nice. What are we? 70% water? Our bodies are 70% water, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything they'd like to share? All right. Well, this has been so lovely. I love you guys participating and getting rid of that stupid mute all. That was just, I felt like I was in a little cage. Great. Thank you so much, everybody. And
Thank you, Jane.
It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
You're welcome. Till next time, everybody. Much love.